Hold up. This isn't some cheesy kid show. This is Kids in the Tank, a young perspective on business from high school students.
Welcome to Kids in the Tank. I'm Trent, and with me in the tank are Sydney and Talon. Today we are honored to have Laura Caldwell as our special guest. Laura is a lawyer, author, and professor at Loyola University of Chicago School of Law. Laura, you are officially in the hot seat.
Thank you. I'm happy to be in the hot seat.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
So to start it off, what is the most interesting case that you've ever seen?
Well, frankly, I think the most interesting case I've ever seen is the O.J. Simpson trial, because I was watching it sort of live. I know a lot of you guys came to it maybe more lately in the form of a mini-series. But the O.J. Simpson trial back in the early 90s was just one of the most sort of remarkable. It was that first example of the legal world being shown on regular TV. And it was that first, I was just newly out of law school. And frankly, it didn't seem like anybody was particularly interested in the legal world. And then all of a sudden, it's sort of everywhere. And people, it lasted during that time when people would sort of Monday night, quarterback the players, so to speak. So there are these, fantastic lawyers, and people were like, I think he should have done this. I think he should have gone up there and asked this. And it didn't, it lasted for that trial. And I was always fascinated, like, if there were more trials sort of regularly shown, would we get more interested in them? And after that, it didn't seem like it. There's been sort of court TV things here and there, and there's trials that like sort of get really big in the news. But in terms of that kind of early in my legal career, it seemed like the O.J. Simpson case was that one thing that everybody had an opinion on. And frankly, I think that's an exciting thing when everybody's talking about something that would normally just be handled by people in that business, by lawyers or by people, in court. It's the same sort of thing as, when, it was because of O.J. and who he was, but it was just exciting that there was so much, interest. And I think one of the big things that I always feel like we don't pay enough attention to the victims in the innocence world, and also in cases like this with the O.J. I mean, Nicole, the victim, was, she really got sort of swamped by that whole thing. And so although that was the most exciting sort of case that I, was so vividly into, it has all those kind of heartbreaking things that any big cases do, which is often that person who initially got hurt gets sort of sucked in and almost drowned in all the big exposure over who did it and what's happening with the lawyers. And really, this poor woman's life was taken. And so that's always the downside. But I think that was the most sort of exciting case, particularly as a young lawyer, and just watching that.
Staying on cases, in the news or in the media today, it seems to be that the media portrays that if you are accused of something, you're automatically guilty, whereas it used to be you're innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
Why do you think that's changed?
Well, it has completely changed in that you are not. I mean, we still say you're innocent until proven guilty. But it's a perceptive question because, frankly, that is a fallacy. You are not innocent until proven guilty. Maybe there are some courtrooms in other states that I'm not a regular, sort of player in, but from everything that I've seen, just speaking from like Chicago right now, you are 100% considered guilty until you can prove otherwise. And I teach a class called Innocence in the Law at Loyola Law School, where basically second and third year law students, we come together for this like a full weekend just to wrestle with the question of what happened to innocence until proven guilty. There's a famous quote by a United States Supreme Court Justice, Sandra Day O'Connor, saying, thank God it's rare that we put someone away who's guilty. We know that that just isn't accurate. And it just still remains kind of one of those things that I think we have to be so careful of. And yet, when you're in Chicago, I really want to encourage you guys to, anyone can visit 26th Street, 26 in California. That is that busiest criminal court system in the world. It's actually the biggest court system in the world is the Chicago criminal courts. It's kind of crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's way close to home. It's pretty insane when you think about it.
Very close to home. And are there that many more bad apples, so to speak, bad actors than in other towns? I don't know. I don't think so necessarily. But of course, there are horrendous crimes and things that just don't even, you can't even conceptualize they're so horrible. And so we have to have a criminal justice system and we have to have all these things in place. And, we can go back and forth about whether people should get out on bail. Should they spend time in a cell until they actually have a case that happens? And we can wrestle over those questions, and I think we will continue to do so. But I just think it's super troubling that my hometown is sort of one of the biggest processors of humans. I mean, I can tell you guys what I think is an interesting experience of a friend of mine who's a juvenile judge. And so juvenile court is generally up until 18 unless they can charge you as an adult. So we're talking usually 13 to 18 is juvenile court. And so she's a judge. And so one day she gets into her chambers and she's got her Starbucks and she's getting her papers together. And she was just starting to meditate, and someone had told her that that was a good thing to do, really to center yourself. So she's kind of having some quiet moments before court. And if you have any experience with meditation, it's interesting. If you try to quiet everything, sometimes your hearing really pops up and you can hear a lot of things. And sometimes just visually, if you just stare at something and try to reduce all your other sensory perception, sometimes that can really, so she was having this meditation and she's hearing things and it sounded like, and she was sort of like, what is that? And she focused in on it and she said, oh yeah, that's about 50 boys between the ages of 13 and 16 who are chained up. They're shackled at the ankle and they're shackled at the wrist in front of them. And then they're chained to each other because that's how you get brought to court. And so she's sitting there like, how did I go from going to law school and now I have about 50 boys chained up outside my office? I mean, that's a startling thing to kind of sort of focus in on and recognize. But I think that's the kind of awareness that we have to keep bringing to these situations, because then otherwise we completely ignore the human factor in it.
And then I just wanted a follow-up question with that quick is, so if there's substantiatory evidence that they are innocent, and the person that is accusing them is under oath, does anything happen to them? Or even if they're before they take the oath, does anything happen to them after it's proven that this person is innocent?
That is a very, very good question. So you're questioning essentially if, for example, someone takes the stand and gives evidence or testimony that later is shown to be not true.
Yeah.
Does anything happen to that witness who gave that false
Yeah.
testimony? Technically, they could be charged with a crime called perjury. Perjury is lying under oath. No one, we recently in Illinois, I guess how many years ago now, tried, in Illinois, we've had a lot of governors that have gone to jail. Are you guys aware of this?
Yep.
Yeah.
My whole family's from
Not a
Illinois.
good situation.
It's disconcerting, to say the least.
Very concerning.
Yeah. But the reason the last Governor Blagojevich went to jail was because he lied under oath in a trial. And that, however, was very rare. Like, we almost never see, we certainly don't see police officers getting charged for perjury ever. And it's come to, it's been sort of called into attention recently that a lot of times they don't remember and they're reading from their report, which is fine. But a lot of times they're saying they remember. And really, it's custom and practice almost for them to give testimony that they're not exactly, they can't really recall it. But because there really is no, there's really no downside right now. Okay. And it's interesting because you bringing that up makes me actually really, in my head, if you were a law student right now, I'd say, you know what, can you start researching when we started, like when perjury, like when did we put that on the books and why? And how many people have been brought up on charges in Illinois on perjury?
Yeah.
If it wasn't a governor, who was it? What kind of people are we used to? And sometimes things just came into question because of a particular time in history. Maybe there were a number of businesses that were somehow getting ahead by someone giving false testimony. I mean, sometimes you just find that there's a cultural, historical reason for certain crimes. But, we really are not. I think it would be somewhat chilling if we ended up trying a lot of people for perjury, because I think it could lead to people being resistant to come to court and give testimony, and we already have a bit of a problem with that. So that's interesting, but it really is not, it's really not something that happens very often.
Okay.
Better start researching on that paper, Talon.
Yeah, especially since I'm very interested in law. So
Good. And if you're interested in law, do you know which sort of angle or which sort of part of it that you're interested in?
I'm pretty interested in law enforcement, and I wanted to become like a prosecutor or a lawyer.
Very cool.
Somewhere in there. Yeah.
Yeah, good. We need really good prosecutors, and we need great people in law enforcement. It's never going to be a business area or something that we won't need. Unfortunately, people will continue to make bad decisions, and we'll continue to have to judge them on it.
Speaking about that, what are some of the steps you think our judicial system should take in order to resolve these type of issues?
Well, that's a very good question. Right now, it's interesting, Talon, that you asked that question about innocence, because I do believe that we should try to hit it a little harder, that this person has been accused of something. In our system, that does not mean that they did it, that it's more likely that they did it. And I think if you get pulled into the jury system, you get told that. But I think in general, we really don't think enough about that and about people who, I mean, I know the way I watch TV is so different now than before I worked on Javon's case. I would just, in my head, say, oh, look, someone got arrested for that. I live right by North Avenue, and sometimes we have a problem with muggings. And I used to just say, oh, great that they caught the dude who was mugging people. Now I watch it and I'm like, oh, I hope that guy was the guy who did it. If not, that's the problem, because then we're putting someone away who didn't do something. And what always happens with, wrongful convictions and with innocent stuff is there's still someone out there committing these crimes. So that's, I'm working on the case of a kid in Dallas who was wrongfully accused of sexual assault of this minor. And DNA has shown that it wasn't him, finally. But he keeps saying, am I the only one who cares who really did this to this little girl? Because it seems to me I'm the only one who kind of gives a crap. And unfortunately, we want people to get to be a prosecutor, to be in law enforcement, and we want you to do a good job, and we want you to be inspired. But I think we don't want you to be inspired to the point where you just want to put that on your scoreboard. And in fact, I found a state's attorney's office down in Arkansas last week, and if you put in their webpage, I'm not going to give the county, but when you pull up this county's website, they have a scoreboard at the bottom that says guilty, not guilty. And then they have like this banner saying like, yay, we put away 34 people this year. Well, good if we're pretty sure that those 34...
Were they actually guilty, though? That's the big question.
That is the big question.
Because if they weren't, that's a little...
Yeah.
Right.
Not very good.
So just being competitive and just looking for the win, so to speak, I think is a little disastrous. We want you to be psyched, and we want you to be competitive, and we want you to want to win. You're representing victims of horrible injustice, but we don't want you to want to win to the point where you'll ignore other things and you'll put autopsy fluids from a little girl's body on a pair of shoes.
Yeah, that's not right.
That's just insane.
You were part of the creation of the Life After Innocence project, which is a wonderful thing you've done. What would you like to improve now, and where do you see it in the next 5 years or so?
I think what we did with Life After Innocence is we called a lot of attention to the fact that people who are innocent, who are fortunate enough to get their cases overturned, are sort of getting walked out into a big new world. I mean, it really is like a Back to the Future kind of thing, if you've ever seen that movie, where you're living in whatever time you went away. Number one, you're that age. So if you get wrongfully convicted at 19, you feel 19 until you get out. Everyone says that. And time also seems to kind of stop so that people don't really, it's almost like it's a lot easier, hypothetically, to be in jail if you are guilty and you know you're guilty. Jail is horrible and it's not fun for anyone. But your entire mind isn't spun around how to get out of there because I'm not supposed to be in there. When you're innocent, like it's just a bad dream all the time. And I've had exonerees tell me like that they wake up in prison and for that one, like 30 seconds, they're like, it's not over. So it's almost like you're traumatized every time you wake up because for that split second or for those like 30 seconds, you're like, oh, yeah. And you wake up and the whole thing comes back again. You're still in this nightmare. And that is the kind of thing that I just, if we could change that, we could, but there is just nothing that can change the experience of then you're released and you walk out into this completely new world where not only has like nothing stopped back when you were 19, there are things that you just do not get. I've taught a lot of people how to Google themselves, and it is fascinating to watch someone who's had no access to. Now we're starting to allow prisoners, particularly if they're getting out, we're allowing them access to the internet so that they can use it in order when they get out. But if you're in for life or if you're on death row, usually they don't give you access to this stuff. So then you're released. And I mean, I've put, a laptop in front of someone and said, this is Google, this is what Google is. Type in your name and watched people clickety-clack and then go, that's me. Oh my God, that's me. And there's my mom. Because look, they're just coming out of the... And it is wild to be in a prison, in a place where people aren't supposed to care about you and they don't. And to all of a sudden, like, get out and your name is sort of out there and sort of everywhere, it really is the kind of thing that, like, sci-fi movies are made of. It really is sort of sci-fi. And so I think by starting Life After Innocence, we brought all that hopefully I know we brought it to the forefront of just general consciousness, but we were also lucky enough to work with all these innocence groups who are already doing so much, and they already are helping people when they get out. And what we were what we hope we've done is sort of tell people, you should contribute to innocence projects, not just because we're getting people out of jail, which they are, but there are a lot of times those innocence project workers, people at various innocence organizations, they are literally giving people their own money. Most of the innocence organizations, people that I know, have moved people into their second bedroom, let them sleep on their floor, given them their clothes. And so what we kind of did was say, we all have to be more aware of this as a culture, that this is a big deal, and contribute to your local innocence organizations and help them continue to help people get out. So,
sounds like a really great program.
Yeah, that's
and I applaud you
fantastic.
for being a part of that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Now, as I told you guys, I'm sort of journeying into the writing world in TV, and so I'm working on a CBS show that's going to come out called Interrogations, and it's where you can watch people being interrogated in different ways, and you sort of make up your mind, like, if you were in law enforcement, you're going to like this, because it's showing you different times that the person was questioned, and then and they're not in order, and then it's like, okay, you decide, what would you do? So what I want to know, though, is what you guys are watching, and like, what are if you had to come up with your favorite TV show, like, right now, we were going to say it had to be on Netflix, but one of my questions is, what are you guys watching TV-wise, and why is it your favorite thing to watch? I mean, some people's favorite things to watch is like 48 Hours, and some people like Dr. Phil, and other people like morning TV. I am one of those people who watches a lot of the, a lot of the 48 Hours kind of shows, because I'm always sort of fascinated. But what is your age range watching? Like, what are your favorite shows or show? If you had to give me one show, what would it be and why?
Well, one show I think is definitely hard. I think right now with me and my dad really like The Following. It's with Kevin Bacon. They basically are following this killer who formed a cult, and his name is Joe Carroll, and he was actually an English professor and wrote many books. And they're trying to figure out why he's doing all these things and how he's like hiding from them, and just basically trying to get into his mind. It's pretty fascinating, because I feel like there's people actually out there like that, like exactly probably in the same thing, that form a cult and have the exact same thing, where the FBI and the local law enforcement are trying to figure out why they're doing this and what their motives are. I'd say like that, and Jack Ryan are probably my two ones that I really enjoy.
I like that. That's a good tip. I hadn't heard about that following. What about you?
For me, it's definitely either Criminal Minds or any of the NCISs. I love crime shows and all the, just everything about it. It just gets me interested.
Did you do Making a Murderer?
No, I've not yet.
Okay.
That's definitely
'Cause
something I'll put on my list.
So you like the plotting and the
Yes, definitely.
of those, and then this will be, when you watch Making a Murderer, you realize, sometimes they can't. It doesn't fit all of those pieces that you see on some of the fiction shows, but almost. I think you're going to love it, and especially you kind of have to at some point. You cannot grow up around in this state and not have seen it, especially because you're just going to go to college and people are going to ask you.
Yeah. I hate how you watch one and then right at the ending, you're going to go to bed and then you see the ending and then you're like, oh, gotta watch another one. And you just keep going and going. It's like, when am I going to stop?
Binging.
Yes.
Yeah. Smart. What about you?
It's definitely Criminal Minds.
It is?
I love how I like seeing how the person, like why they do things and like how their past life like affected them. Like I love seeing how one event can make a whole person into either good or bad, or like they don't understand how the thing they're doing isn't bad. They think it's normal. I think that's super cool.
It is interesting. And especially, that's an interesting field, is that whole, the psychology behind certain things. And sometimes we don't take enough time to actually figure it out. We're just like, well, they did it, see ya. So now you guys are going to get me watching Criminal Minds again.
So I was doing a little research on you last night, and I was on your website, and in a video you said it, a lot of things about small decisions. And with that, how do your small decisions impact your business and the people you try to help lives?
Yeah, I think remembering that small choices do lead to big changes is, I have to remind myself that constantly. Because I think, frankly, when you look at a goal, I think most of them are overwhelming. I don't know. Don't you guys think about, like, college? Doesn't that just make you want to go, like, hide under a cover somewhere? Like, getting into college. That's, like, way too big.
Yeah, it's a big step.
It's a big step. So I guess because I get overwhelmed, I like to just kind of put blinders on and think about, all right, what are just 3 small things I could do right now? I guess I could just look at 3 colleges that I've heard about today. Like, that's just one thing you can do. And the way that I broke down writing books, I ended up really just making small goals. Like, this week I'm going to write 1 page. This week I'm going to write 1 chapter. And I would just make a goal at the beginning of the week, and I'd make sure to tell someone. And then by making these small goals, like, somehow over time literally I feel like by just doing that, like, I still can't believe I have as many books out as I have, but it's really just that choice to make small decisions, make small goals.
Were you a short-term or a long-term goal person?
I'm definitely short-term because I almost have no long-term goals, and that's a problem. You have long-term goals, right?
A little bit.
I know. It's hard to come up with them, even at as you get older. I wish I was better at it, because I think you can break it down into much smaller, digestible pieces that you can work on. But it is that matter of setting your goal and then sort of breaking it down into pieces.
Okay.
You were talking about, like, college and, like, how you're a professor. How do you, like, what do you see most that drives kids away from the subject of law? Like, what drives kids away or makes them nervous about going into that field?
Well, we see a lot of people come to the law school and they're really interested in it, but I think they want to go right to trials and sort of doing these big pieces. And really the law is a lot of minutia. It's a lot of detailed. You really have to be one of those people who can spend a ton of time in a book and in statutes or on a screen because you're really downloading so much. And when you take the bar exam, it is one of the most just overwhelming experiences you can have. And I think the only way you can do it is by being one of those people who can really put a lot of information into your brain at once. And it's not always pleasant, you know? But that's the kind of thing that you can build on. But what I find is that sometimes people just don't have that. They don't have that nature, and that's not really in their ability to build on it, you know? It's got to be something that you can stick your head into and almost like disappear into a book.
Being a lawyer, how much would you say your gut instinct helps you when someone says they're innocent and whether you truly believe them or not?
I think it's troubling. And I think when you go into law enforcement, what did I just hear a cop say to me this week? I try not to decide who did it until I figure out, like, I'm not supposed to be the decision. We're supposed to find out who did it, not who I think did it. And so sometimes when we go on these gut intuitions, all of a sudden it's really just about who you think did it. And then you're marshaling all these sort of facts into this one area. And that is, it is the nature of deciding, but it also is so dangerous. I actually was mugged about, I think it was a month before I started, officially launched Life After Innocence. I was walking down the street and I got jumped and pushed to the ground, and they went through my pockets and got my, I had an iPod on me and nothing else, and they took off. But when I was called by the police to go down and try to pick them out of a lineup, I knew it had been dark, and I'd been reading about how eyewitness misidentification is the #1 cause of wrongful convictions. But we can't do away with it, because if you and I are on a road and I hit you, you have to be able to say, it was that redhead in that blue car. If we take that out, then there's no video there's no skid marks, like then we have no evidence. So we have to have it. But it is the #1 cause of wrongful convictions, is misidentification. So when the cops called me when I was mugged and said, hey, we think we got these guys, and I couldn't even really tell them much except for what color they were wearing, I thought, how do you know you have them? And I was too nervous, and I was like, I didn't even want to go down because I was afraid I would follow their suggestions, pick them out of a lineup, and then I'd be the one putting someone away. But, I mean, that's not necessarily good either, because we need everybody as part of the justice system, whether you're a witness or a judge or a prosecutor, you know, everybody's got to play their part to the best of their abilities. But knowing that it's so easy to make a mistake, it was, that was like the worst part of being a victim of a crime and feeling like I couldn't or shouldn't do anything about it because I felt like I was going to mess it up. But it still remained, I'm still kind of glad it happened because it gave me an immediate example of how hard that is.
That's a terrible situation. I hope you're okay now.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have new teeth because of it.
Oh.
Oh my gosh.
I know. So these teeth were, they got knocked out. And so my lovely smile I owe to my mugging. I know. That's what we call black humor.
I never thought I'd hear that phrase in my life. That's
I know,
a
and
little weird to
hopefully
think.
never.
Thank you so much for answering all of our questions.
Oh, you guys are good.
We'll now be switching into our next segment. Flip It, where you'll be asking us the questions.
Flip it. So I got my one question out, which was favorite shows.
Okay.
Now I want to know if you had to do a favorite book or two at this point, whether you were forced to read it because of school or just something you picked up, if you had to say right now, this is the best book that I've read. Sometimes I think best books are something that you were forced to read, but it brought something to your attention. So it wasn't necessarily like, this is the greatest, this is so fun. But sometimes it's that thing that like you learned so much by reading that book. One of the ones for me that I think was one of the best books was this book by Barry Scheck about a wrongful conviction. And it just because it crystallized in my head how it can happen. But if I had to pick like the most entertaining book, I would go with Scott Turow's, probably his first book, because I just think he's amazing. So if you had to give a favorite book.
Favorite book?
Yes.
I would say Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
I agree. I have that on my, I'm listening to that on audio.
Yeah, I've only got a couple chapters in, but I love the book.
And it doesn't it point out so many things that you start noticing in...
Yeah, small things that you
Think and Grow
overlook.
Rich. Yeah, and he's got a couple other books.
Yeah, he's a phenomenal author, and I haven't read any of his other books. My father has, and he's the one that turned me on to this book, and I'm very, very happy that he did the 13 Principles and everything.
Yeah, and if you guys aren't, if you don't have an Audible account or, I think sometimes books like that, meaning more like where we're trying to learn or it's self-help in some way that you're trying to improve yourself. I sometimes think those books, I love listening to them just on my headphones because I don't know if I would always get through enough of it by just sitting down and reading it. So there's something about having those that, so I have that one on Audible right now. So I'm picking that up again. What about you?
I haven't read this book since freshman year, but I believe the title is To Kill a Mockingbird with Atticus Finch.
Oh, yeah,
Yes,
that's a good
yes,
book.
and yes.
I took a lot from that book, just all the different perspectives on it, the different scenarios. And it did have to do with law, which is kind of ironic in this scenario, but that would probably have to be my favorite.
Yeah, that's an amazing one. And she's got another book that was published in the last couple years, To Set a Watchman, which I think she wrote before
Oh, yeah, I did hear
that
about
book,
that.
which I
Yep.
haven't checked out yet either, but might be worth checking out. What about you?
I'm not like a big reader, but I remember this one book is called Ringer.
Ringer. And what was it about?
I don't remember, but I know it's
why
good.
you liked it?
But it was good.
And it just, and you remember because you were like wanting to get back to it, or what made it like, if you recall, like what made it good?
I remember I hated reading, and it was like 5th grade, and I remember going to that was my favorite class because everybody would get so into the book. Because I remember it was it was kind of like a horror. It was kind of weird because it was for 5th graders, but it was kind of like mystery and like crime, and I think like everybody loved it so much, and it made it so much more interesting because people actually wanted to read it.
Right.
And I remember wanting to go to that class.
Now you guys here's my other question for the flip it. You guys are considered like sort of the Harry Potter age. Are we Harry Potter fans?
Yes. I definitely was when I was a kid, but not anymore.
Really?
I used to read those all the time. My mom would get mad because I wouldn't put the books down.
See that, and doesn't that...
Yeah, that was...
Is
They were
that the
interesting.
best experience, though, when you can't put a book down? That's the greatest.
Yeah.
That was 3rd, 4th grade me, but after that, I kind of lost it.
I have all the books, and I think the last time I read it was sophomore year.
Nice.
And I finished them in a week.
Did you watch the movies?
Yeah.
Yes.
You did? Did we think they lived up? So that's the big thing with authors. People are always asking, can a book actually be translated to a movie? And I think those did really well, which you would think because there's so many details and so many sort of sci-fi
All the
details.
special effects in in those movies, too. That's insane.
Yeah.
That they could
Right.
pull some of those stunts off.
Right. So if you wrote a book and someone did make a movie, who would play you? I'll go first. This is part of the flip it.
I don't know about that one.
So you can this can be like shooting for the stars here, because here's mine. I want Reese Witherspoon to play me.
She's a good actor.
She's kind of fabulous. She looks good as a redhead. And so I would, if they ever made a book about Long Way Home, if I ever made a movie or a show, I, in a perfect world, would want Reese Witherspoon to play me. So, in a perfect world, who would play you in a movie?
I don't know the actress's name, but it's AJ in Criminal Minds. The
Oh,
blonde.
okay,
Yes,
yeah. I
yes,
love her.
That's a good one. I could see that.
I love her.
One of the Jonas Brothers when he picks up an acting career.
Nick,
okay.
I could
Right?
see. I could see maybe
Nick.
Nick.
Yes.
I mean, I wasn't a Jonas Brothers person, but I know who they are, and he
I know who it
reminds
is,
me of
but-
Nick.
I'll let you guys answer that for me.
That could be a good one for you.
For me, I'm kind of torn between a couple of different actors. I'd say my number one would be Mark Wahlberg, because I just love all his work. The way he depicted Marcus Luttrell in Lone Survivor.
I didn't see that.
It's about Operation Red Wing, when it was the biggest casualty in Navy SEAL history. It's where Marcus Luttrell was the only survivor. And either him or John Krasinski from The Office,
Yes.
Jim Halpert. I one of those two. I've always loved John Krasinski. So
And
Such a good
he
show.
Definitely seems to be the best, right? And he seems to be one of those actors who's like always getting better and always like doing new roles. And sometimes people don't let you, so you can't.
Yeah.
But he seems.
Well, I feel like for actors, sometimes you get in that image, like, for example, The Office, like, for 9 seasons, he played Jim Halpert, and seeing him, like, I watched 13 Hours, a story about Benghazi, and him in that movie was completely different, like a totally different. He's on one spectrum here in The Office, he's on a different spectrum here with the movie. So it's kind of cool to see how the actors evolve, and sometimes breaking their character is not always the easiest, or it doesn't always turn out to be the best.
Yeah.
So I think those.
Yeah, and I think too sometimes when you have like an agent, they'll often tell you like stay in that kind of office type role. Or I know with like literary, when I started writing, that was sort of in the genre of like Bridget Jones's Diary, Sex and the City. They were calling it chick lit. Then people sort of want you to stay there. Because it's easier to market things that, you sort of, it's like a known quantity.
You can't evolve, though.
That's right. But then you sort of can't evolve.
You're stuck in a rut. Mm-hmm. I think that's what the downfall to a lot of actors and artists, whether they're authors, musicians, whatever.
Right.
And anything.
Right.
If you're stuck in that rut and you can't get out of it, eventually you're gonna go down.
And you're just going to feel like you're just spinning in the same.
Yeah.
All right.
Laura, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your insight.
Thank you guys. You're delightful.
Yeah,
Pleasure
thank
to
you
meet
very
you. Yeah.